I'm really happy to introduce our next fireside chatters next to our non-roaring fire. We have Oren Etzioni, Claire Wardle, and Dimitrakopoulou, and I'm going to stick to the briefer intros than I had planned, but just say a couple of words about each. So, Oren is he's widely regarded for his research in artificial intelligence. He's a pioneer in meta-search. I think I'm in front of the speaker. Online comparison shopping, machine learning, and open information extraction. His H-index, for those of you academics in the room know what that means, crushes my H-index, so I'm not even going to mention mine, but it's a whopping 100, which means at least 100 technical papers have been cited at least 100 times. I saw your tweet or your X-post celebrating that moment, pretty amazing, and I'm pretty sure you interviewed me when I was looking for a job back in the day, and so good to...
That was too modest to say. We made him an offer. We begged, but that's another story for another time.
Really wonderful to have you here, Oren. And Claire Wardle, a leader in the field of misinformation, I think also disinformation, verification, user-generated content. She's a co-founder and co-director of the Information Futures Lab and professor of the practice at the Brown School of Public Health. And in a recent conversation, we reconnected, and it was just fascinating to hear from the air game you've been playing with misinformation, your shift to starting to focus on local communities, and some of the connections I think will come out naturally. And finally, our moderator today, Dimitrakopoulou, who is C3's head of translational research. She leads socio-technical research at the intersection of dialogue, technology, and design. I don't know why I'm reading these notes, because Dimitra and I basically talk 3 to 4 times a day, and she's just become one of my closest and most trusted colleagues and leaders of C3. And with that, I turn over to Dimitra for our fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire and Oren, welcome. We're so happy that you're with us today.
Thanks for having us.
And I'd love to kick off the conversation with a prompt that we usually use in our work across C3 and Cordigo. And I'd like to invite you to reflect on your journey as thought leaders in your respective fields, and think of a value that means that is important to you, something that can help us understand what drives your work, why you do what you do. And if you're up for it, I'd like to invite you to share a story or an experience that can help us understand the value that you shared a little bit better. Claire, would you like to start?
Yes. It's so wonderful to be here. And I spend a lot of my days in the armpit of the internet. And I have to say, this morning, I was like at a massive shower. It was so, the work you're doing here is incredible. It's really incredible. And so I just want to say I really was blown away, and just amazing ideas and enthusiasm and passion and hope. So I just want to say that. It really was extraordinary this morning. And I think because of all of that, I actually started this work about 20 years ago, working with the BBC, who in 2007 said, we're getting all this stuff from the audience, and we don't know what's true or not. And so my very niche area of how do you tell what's true on the internet, early days, that's what I was excited about. But because I started that journey, I said, if you're having a problem with the audience, let's go and talk to them. So I did all of this work with people across the UK who were sending stuff to the BBC. And so many of them are like, the BBC asks me all the time, what do you think is going on in the Middle East? Bear in mind, this was 2007. And I've got no idea what's happening in the Middle East. But I can tell you about my experiences, right? So this is why so much of this work resonates. So I worked with the BBC to change their call to action, to say, stop asking what people think. Like, tell us what you know, what you've experienced. So I think my word would be participation, because when I'm in the armpit of the internet, disinformation spaces are participatory. People feel heard, they feel like they've got a sense of agency, they're doing their own research, but they feel like their voice means as much, and they can share with each other We spend time in trusted information spaces, which are top-down, linear, and hierarchical. I don't think the New York Times cares what I think. I don't feel part of something. I'm not participating with most newsrooms or most trusted. So I think if we go back to understanding why participation matters, which is what you're doing here, we're on the right journey.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. Oren?
For me, let me share a personal story. My dad was a sociologist for many years. He was one of the founders of what's called the communitarian movement in this country and internationally. He passed away this last year at the age of 94. Always sad, but he led a full life. And he really emphasized to me as a university professor, even though he was a sociologist and I'm a computer scientist, he emphasized the notion of a public intellectual. He said it's just not enough to write papers, and I've written too many, as Deb indicated, and it's not enough even if you write them and they're cited and all that. You really need to figure out how the work you do in the ivory tower translates to impact. And I don't think that's any surprise to anybody here. I think probably that's the reason that you're here. But it is something that always guided me in my work and that I think ought to guide computer scientists. And it's very much the motivation behind this new organization that I've found that I hope I'll have a chance to tell you a little bit more about, truemedia.org.
Thanks, Oren. I was hoping that you would share this story with us about your dad. Thank you. Claire, you've been studying mis and disinformation for over a decade now. How has the landscape changed over these 10 years? What new challenges have emerged?
So from where I sit, there's more of it than ever, right? Like we can't change that. But I think, and this Deb kind of alluded to this, is that I would say when we think about where the money is going, where funders are going, where headline writers are going, where dinner party chatter conversation goes, it's about the worst of the worst. Like, how do people think that Bill Gates is microchipping it? Like, when actually, to me, we will always have those falsehoods, right? As humans, we are drawn to that. But actually, I think if we look at the much wider part of the information ecosystem, which is people who've just got very valid questions and concerns and things they're confused about and are seeking answers and actually can't get those answers from government agencies, from universities, from their local newsrooms. And so therefore, going to conspiracy theorists who are like, oh, I've got the answer to that. So the way I've thought about mis and disinformation is, can we stop focusing on the worst of the worst and do a much better job of actually supporting those people who've got very valid questions and concerns? And that's not as sexy as like, but actually that's what I think we failed. I think it's easier to blame the Russian trolls and the 14-year-old boys in their basement on Discord than it is to say, how did government agencies fail people during the pandemic? How have we got to a point where people don't know whether they can trust the electoral system because they don't know whether or not they should take their ID to the voting location? Like, there's just basic stuff that we haven't done a good enough job of answering. So to me, the answer to getting us out of this is working deeply with communities to listen to their questions and concerns and give them information in formats that make sense, that are culturally sensitive, that are translated, and are from people that they trust. And that's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's sure as hell not fact-checking our way out of the problem.
How are you addressing this challenge? How are you helping communities grapple with those issues that you mentioned?
So very quickly, we did a project at the end of last year with Spanish-speaking diaspora communities in South Florida. And every Sunday, we would send out a very short 3-question survey. And we identified these members of the community that we called information navigators. Maybe they had a hair salon, maybe they had a construction team, but they were people that others trusted. So every Sunday, we'd send 3 questions. What questions do your community have this week? What concerns do they have? And what rumors are they hearing? So it was kind of a proxy for that. And every Monday, we would get this spreadsheet that was full of, I'm underinsured, where do I get a mammogram? Should I buy a gun? Are Jews safe in America? Should I get a shingles vaccine? I mean, why does it keep raining in Miami? And we were like, hang on. So we were like, well, you can just Google this. And of course, you can't effectively Google it, and you sure as hell can't do it in Spanish. And so then we would create this content and send it back in formats that made sense, that went through those trusted messengers. And it was a game changer for me about how can we get closer to people and really help them navigate these information spaces that we go, oh, of course you can find the information. actually it's getting increasingly difficult to find useful information. So to me, that's really shaped our work at the lab for the last couple of years. And to be honest, has made me feel more hopeful than spending time in the worst parts of the internet being like, oh, people are being awful to each other again. Like that wasn't good for anybody's mental health.
Thanks, Claire. Oren, I know that you were once an optimism about the positive potential of AI. I recently read a news story about that with one of your interviews. What was the turning point that got you worried?
To clarify, I'm still very much an AI optimist. When I think about self-driving cars, right, we have 40,000 deaths on this country's highways alone each year and millions of injuries. So when I think about that, when I think about the cost of healthcare, the accessibility of healthcare, both in this country and throughout the world, I see enormous potential for what AI can do, and it's not hypothetical. We're working on it. Again, self-driving cars are further away than we think, but AI-based safety systems in cars are already here, and they keep getting better. So I want to be clear, I'm an AI optimist. But at the same time, you can be an AI optimist and realize that it's not just all roses and sunshine. And particularly when it comes to these issues around truth, around misinformation and disinformation, we're at a particular point in time that's kind of a perfect storm, particularly this year. And the perfect storm has the following three components. Social networks, which I don't need to tell anybody here about. Generative AI, which is continuing to get better at just a remarkable rate. So you've heard of Sora, but since then, which was just a few weeks ago, there's more and more with voice cloning. There's Vasa, if I'm pronouncing correctly, which got the Mona Lisa to be rapping. Right, she's not known as a rapper in general, but thanks to AI. So generative AI is just moving blindingly fast. And then we have this year something like 2 billion people going to the polls. We still have elections coming up in the EU and in India. And we have what could be one of the most consequential elections in history in this country in November. So in that context, we have the combination of these trends that we've seen for a long time with a new kind of danger, right? The use of generative AI to create deepfakes at an unprecedented scale, unprecedentedly low cost, right? It's always been the case that state actors with ample resources could engage in attacks. But what about cyber information terrorism? What about somebody spending $5 to create a deepfake of President Biden in the New Hampshire robocall we're familiar with? So we really are at an unprecedented point. And I came to realize that in a meeting earlier this summer, I'm going on and on, so I won't tell you the whole story. But then I said, okay, so there's this problem and people are raising the alarm. I'm definitely not the only one. But I looked around and it felt like it was the weather. Everybody was complaining about it, but nobody was doing anything about it. And as a technologist, I said, wait a minute, we can do something about it. We don't have a panacea, but we can work to detect deepfakes and to alert people about them and to create a more vibrant and appropriate information ecosystem.
Thanks, Oren. Over to you, Claire. You've discussed in your work the concept of information disorder, and I'd love for you to unpack this concept a little bit, tell us what this means, and it would be great if you could share a recent example of viral misinformation to illustrate what are some of the types of misinformation disorder.
Yeah, so actually, I remember being at a hackathon here in 2017, February 2017, when everybody was like, oh my God, fake news. And partly because I've been doing this work for a while, I was like, most of this stuff isn't fake, and most of this doesn't even look like news. So I was like, I'm going to try and come up with a new term. So I co-authored a report called Information Disorder. It's not caught on. My mum uses it. But what I was trying to get people to understand was like the nuance and complexity. And so I sort of made this Venn diagram that has found its way onto many slides, which now I deeply regret. But I was trying to say, look, there's a difference between disinformation, deliberately created content, misinformation, my mum when she reshares that deliberate information, not realizing it. And we kind of came up with this third category, malinformation, which is genuine information that is then shared to cause harm, like image-based abuse, another, a better term than revenge porn. And I sort of felt really smug about it, right? Like it really looked nice on a slide. But then as I spent more time in the armpit of the internet, like I'd find, people in anti-vax communities, and they really believed that they were preventing harm. They really believed that they were the ones that had right on their side. Or people who stormed the Capitol, they really believed that they were defending democracy and protecting the Constitution. I was like, well, where do they sit in my Venn diagram? They don't. They're not deliberately creating false information knowingly to cause harm, but they're also not my mum mistakenly sharing. Like they spend all day researching this. So I think to me, this space has moved so quickly. Like if I look outside, it's a very different world in 2024 than it was in 2016. And I think the simplicity with which we want to put this problem in a box completely ignores where actually this is about identity, it's about performance. So when you ask about examples, when we do a lot of monitoring of election type information, in a country like the US, which now has very low trust in the electoral process, I don't have to fake an image. I just need to take an image of the messiness of democracy, and that will go viral now if it's a long queue outside a polling station. We're like, I told you so. You can't trust it. So I think what we also have to understand is when people have got such deeply held beliefs as they do now, I'm less concerned about the need to create the fakes. I mean, we'll get into the conversation about deep fakes. I'm very concerned about local-based audio deep fake content. I'm not concerned about a Biden deep fake. I'm worried about an audio message from a local preacher saying, don't go to the polls because there's going to be violence. Like that stuff. So I think when we think about the challenges of the next few months, I don't think it looks in the way that it looked in 2016 or 2018 or even 2020. I think we've seen a shifted pattern now to just reinforce people's existing beliefs with genuine content.
I just want to follow on what you said, because we are agreeing furiously. When I started this project, I went and spoke to the social media networks, various people there. And again, while I have a lot of concerns about what they do, and I'm sure you do too, there's a lot of good people there and very well-intentioned folks. And I spoke to them about these types of concerns, and they reassured me. They said, oh no, any video comes out, we're ready to shut it down within seconds, even if it's sampled and so on. And then I said to them something that's very analogous, not the same, but analogous to what you said about the local preacher. I said, well, what if there are 10,000 videos and they're different and they're targeted in various ways, like local? And what if they're being amplified by both bots and well-intentioned people? And now there's no single thing to shut down. It's just this kind of crisis. And, one of the people, I won't mention the network, said to me, look, a bird. And I turned, you ran away. I'm being tongue-in-cheek here. The point is they are not ready for that. And again, I hope it doesn't happen, but there is this exposure, particularly around voter suppression, particularly around highly convincing hyper-local content.
Oren, in a conversation we had recently, you mentioned that you're dedicating 2024 to thinking deeply and proactively about political deepfakes in the context of the upcoming elections. With the tools that you're building to fight disinformation, what innovative AI approaches most excite you for rapidly detecting deepfakes across platforms during the 2024 electoral cycle?
So let me take a step back and then get to that. So what we've done is we've built a free website, truemedia.org. It's account-based, so just adversaries can't willy-nilly use it, but any of you can go there, get on our waiting list. I promise that we will clear folks with MIT affiliation very quickly. If you want to engage, both try it out. And we're also reaching out to journalists and fact checkers. So basically, we have a tool where you can upload a social media post from Twitter, from TikTok, what have you, and it analyzes it to see whether it's a fake, whether the media is manipulated by AI, audio, video, or images. And we're trying to make this as widely available as possible. But from an AI point of view, to go to your question, we're just in an interesting place. Generative AI, as I mentioned, is getting better and more persuasive very, very quickly. And we're in a bit of an arms race because we're also able to improve our classifiers that detect whether something is likely to be a deepfake or not very quickly as well. So right now, we can work with something like more than 90% accuracy across these different media, but it's changing very rapidly and fluidly. And frankly, the biggest issue is less a technical issue and much more of one where we need help. And when I say help, I'm really looking at each and every one of you, because there is no Google for all of social media, as you know, right? There's these Discord groups, and the internet has many armpits, right? And so we really need people's help to unearth these things and then to post a response. So let's say you see something about a voting station or about the Middle East or about what have you, and it's just fake. We now create a resource that allows you to analyze it and post a response that's hopefully more constructive, if I can use that word. But all of that is, I should emphasize, is far from a panacea. So I'm not sitting here telling you, hey, I'm Oren Etzioni, I got this. Far from it. We are in trouble, we need help, and I'm hoping that together we can prevent some of the most dire scenarios.
And just to jump on that, there's lots of research about how you post and say you're wrong, and it's all about empathy. And so I don't know who the person here was from, which showed me the Sage chatbot upstairs, which is about how you have difficult conversations. You should partner with them so you can say to Uncle Bob, Bob, that's not true, but you do it with empathy. So Bob doesn't shut you down.
Brilliant.
Yeah, done.
Oren, how do you hope that the tools that you're building with gain adoption?
So the channels, we're frankly experimenting with different channels. We like the price point of our service. It's free. And we are reaching out to people who have, usually I've done a lot of work with startups. You're looking for customers with deep pockets. We're looking for customers with shallow pockets. So the fact that it's free plays well when we reach out to newsrooms, Reuters, CNN, all of the usual suspects. Nobody has money to spend on this stuff, and so we're very pleased. We're backed by Garrett Camp, who was the co-founder of Uber. Very pleased to be able to offer it for free. But there's still a huge awareness gap. We're going with journalists and fact checkers, right? Each one of them has their own audience, so hopefully can amplify. But probably there's no substitute for two additional things. Mm-hmm. The first one is a grassroots movement, which is why I'm particularly excited about students spreading the word. And the second one is just increased education, better media literacy. So even in my most optimistic scenarios, I don't think when November comes around, 80%, even 20% of the US population is going to be armed with our free tool. My hope is that the tool, the people talking about it, that the work that you're doing and the work that you're doing reaches a point where people have the basic understanding that when you see something and it's jarring and it's upsetting and it's true, like Mark Ruffalo, the famous actor, when he saw a picture of Donald Trump on the Epstein plane with a bunch of underage girls. And he was like, of course, that's totally Trump. And he forwarded on Twitter to 1 million followers before he took time to think, actually, it's not true. This particular thing was not true. This particular image was a deep fake. So if we reach a point where even Uncle Bob, because we've approached him with empathy, takes a minute to say, is this real? I know it's jarring. I'm sure it's true, but maybe I should just double check. Not just because I got it from my friend Betty, who got it from who knows what, who got it for some troll. If we can get people to be a little bit more reasoned in their analysis, to ask what's the provenance, to try to share information that really is bona fide, then I think we're going to be in better shape in November. True media is just a small component of it, and we need to work together to achieve this kind of outcome.
Claire, you're leading the Information Futures Lab at Brown University. How are you and your team imagining the future of information?
So building off what you're saying, I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is that people lose trust in anything. And we could do a whole conference on Kate Middleton, right? There are still large portions of the internet that do not believe that the video of her sitting on the bench is real, right? And there's different elements to that, which is A, it was filmed by a BBC camera. They should have had multiple cameras. They should have had witnesses. I mean, we can't do a single camera shoot these days, right? So we have to learn from all of this. But I am deeply concerned about the three elements. A, that the content itself might be problematic. Secondly, that people just stop believing in anything they see or hear. And thirdly, that politicians who do lie and get caught out go, oh no, it's a deep fake, right? The liar's dividend. So I think when we think about this challenge, when we think about the future of information, we've got to think about technical challenges, but we've actually got to think about where society is in terms of thinking about truth and watching people's responses to graphic imagery from the Middle East over the last few months. And even my students been like, there's no way that's true. And thinking that has happened so quickly that's my concern. So I think, and this is a challenge for newsrooms, how do we actively talk about the threats posed by deepfakes without catastrophizing and making people go, shrug emoji, right? Like that. And what we see in terms of trust is more and more people turning to one another, not trusting news media, not trusting fact checkers. And so that's the concern, that as people are turning inwards, which is why, again, working with communities is so critical. So A, we can spot when this content is circulating, and secondly, we can work with trusted messengers to really like stop this. So that when I think about the future, there's amazing technology, but it's what's it layered upon. And I think too often we can get too focused on that without recognizing that the response is how do people who are emotional and identity and performance driven use content and make sense of content.
Yeah. As a parent of two young kids, I often worry about the world we're building for the future generations. And I was part of a conversation with young people recently, and something that they shared is that now AI has become a new form of entertainment. So if you engage in an argument with one of your friends at school, you can just produce a deepfake video and just make it go viral. I've also read about deep nudes, so this is becoming another very disturbing phenomenon. So I wonder, what are your thoughts in terms of how we can make younger people pause to think before they post something that can have harmful content? Wow,
I thought I was working on hard problems. Can I instead address world peace? I have a 13-year-old boy, and getting him to pause to think is a major is a major aspect. I do think that we need to get very clear on the rules, right? So we have so many new situations, both in political discourse, but also, like you said, in schools. I don't know if you saw the news about the athletic director, I think it was in Baltimore, who created a deepfake audio of the principal at his school because they had a work dispute and it was a revenge thing. He posted it on Instagram or something like that, and it went viral. We are living in a world now where all these things are going to happen more. I think that one constructive step would be to be very clear with our kids about what are the rules, right? It's going to be hard to prevent them from doing bad things, particularly impulsively, if they don't know exactly, look, you do this. First of all, you will get caught, because I emphasize to my kid all the time, anything you put electronically, you think it's erased or blah, 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 but people screenshot it. Just assume that if you post something to another friend, assume that they went, right, and gave a copy of that to their parents. And when I said that, it was like, what? I was like, guaranteed, right? That's how things work. So I think understanding that things are indelible and then understanding the rules is going to take us a step in the right direction. But realistically, this is a work in progress, right? Unfortunately, we're still trying to figure out how social networks work. We're still trying to figure out how phones work. When are we allowed to use them, when are we not? We're still trying to figure out how ChatGPT works, right? When it first came out, the New York public school system said, oh, we'll just disallow it in the classroom, right? Good luck with that. So this was a long-winded way of saying, I don't know.
I know.
But I think it's important to have the conversation. I mean, we've been talking about deepfakes since 2017, 2018. It was always about pornography. Everything starts there. And so all of this, like, I'm worried about the Biden deepfake. It's like, no, I'm worried about all of my students who have their Instagram accounts open and are having all of their faces pulled, so it's being used in deepfake porn. So I do think it's about having the conversations, but not catastrophizing, but also ensuring that parents understand. And my students, who lots of them don't understand how easy it would be for me to pull and scrape their feed. So I think a lot of this is awareness. So again, I think the problem is the awareness and the adoption is slower than the way that the tech is developing. So we always feel like we're just lagging behind.
Yeah. Claire, you mentioned trust several times in your previous remarks. What do you see the role of trust is in balancing between people power and tech power to help communities thrive in this future world?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is for those of us who work in so-called trusted institutions to have more humility. When you talk to people about what happened during the pandemic, they are mad as hell at the WHO and the CDC. And you're like, well, what would need to happen? They're like, I just want them to acknowledge and apologize. Right? So much of this comes back to very human encounters. And so I think there's a lot of ego in places that, to be, Andrew, no offense, but like in newsrooms, like, well, they should just trust us because we're the local newsroom, or it's like, why? You're not listening to me, you're not giving me content that makes sense to me, you don't represent my community, and when I do see my community, it's not the way that I see my community. So I think when we talk about trust, there's this sense of certain institutions are trusted or trustworthy, and they're not. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that it's going to take 30 to 50 years to rebuild that trust, and we need to start the work now. And in the meantime, understand that trust exists in communities. So how can we, with humility, work and partner with communities as opposed to swoop in, parachute, extract, and leave, which is ultimately what many trusted institutions have done. So that's why this work here excites me so much. But trust does not look the way that it used to, because ultimately trust is, who do you think has got your back? And most people do not think that universities or newsrooms or government agencies have got their back, and that needs to change.
I want to make a somewhat different point. What's a good panel without some controversy? And everything that Claire said, I've agreed with furiously. Here, I would take a slightly different perspective for the following reason. Obviously, there's value in being responsive to the community and engaging with empathy and all that. But there's also a downside, right? If we say that our job in the media is to do that, then there's a tension between that and between unwelcome facts and between the truth that I know it's a complex epistemological question, is there a single truth? But I'm just thinking of, I recently got to read Barry Weiss's resignation letter from the New York Times, which is an absolutely fascinating letter, because one way to frame what she was saying is the New York Times over time, in engaging with key issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and many issues like that, became more responsive to its community. But in the process of doing that, it undercut other values like free speech, like open deliberation, and so on. So I would
That's the market, because the New York Times had a subscription model, and so they were figuring out who was paying their subscription. I mean, it's a bigger conversation. But yeah.
It is a bigger conversation for sure, and we can only scratch the surface. But let me just put, as part of that conversation, a counterclaim, which is the way that we maintain and restore trust, which we feverishly agree is essential, is to be as factual as possible. Empathy and community be damned. So, for example, in the context of WHO or COVID, we need to decide, to the best of our ability, did it originate from China or not? Was masking or keeping kids from school the right thing or not? And those are complex facts, but those are ultimately factual issues. Those are not things that should be politicized
they were
or should be
unproven.
hugged about.
They were unproven at the time. So in January 2020, when WHO tweeted, fact, COVID is not airborne, that was factually untrue. And they have not, so that's the problem when you have an unproven situation. We can't have truth. And a lot of spaces now when we have unproven science or unsettled science is what means people are losing trust in us. Anyway, for discussion.
I'd love to invite some questions from the audience. I think we have about like 7 to 8 minutes to get some questions. And we should have mics. Yes, they're coming. So until we have that set up, maybe we can start wrapping up on a more hopeful note, if that's possible. Like I'm thinking, looking ahead, what makes you hopeful? What makes you hopeful?
What makes me hopeful is actually the conversation that we're having. There's so many instances of it, from the World Economic Forum to classrooms and so on. So there's some negative trends and things being undermined, certainly trust, but people are not unaware. People are in lots of different ways trying to figure out how to make things better. So I am hopeful that many of us, not everybody, but many of us have our heart in the right place.
So let's hear from you. We have 2 mics. Emily, I think you can go there. And it would be great if you could introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi. Hi, Emily Lynn from the Practicing Democracy Project. I work with Marshall at the Harvard Kennedy School. You've talked about a few, through the whole day, but in this panel also, technical interventions or scaffolding that can help mitigate against sort of broader technological and social trends. If we just held the technology constant for the moment, what human resiliencies, like purely human, purely social resiliencies, do you think would also help mitigate?
It's so hard for me because when you said the premise of your question, I apologize, my mind just shut down. It's so impossible for me to conceive of a world where we hold the technology constant. So I understand you're formulating a hypothetical, but I think it's essential to understand that technology is not constant. And for example, with AI, there was an attempt to declare a 6-month moratorium. And I found that actually to be just a waste of breath, because ain't going to happen, and so on. So I think we have to start any conversation, and if human resilience is extremely important, but we have to start every conversation with technologies moving fast. Now what?
Claire, short answer?
Yeah, and I'll just say it's about talking about it. Like, I think all of us have muted the annoying friend from high school or Uncle Bob, right? Because we don't want to get into those difficult conversations. And when people say to me, I don't even know what to trust anymore, what's the point? Like, democracy will completely crumble if we give up on belief in these systems. How do we improve those systems? So, yes, media literacy, but I wish we had more conversations about the need to have conversations about why this matters. When people go, oh, it's just an Instagram meme, keep your knickers on, Claire. I'm like, that Instagram meme is like there's a constant drip, 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 drip. And what does that mean to people's understanding of misogyny or anti-Semitism or whatever else? So to me, it's like, how do we have useful conversations with each other about that?
Maybe we can take one more question and then we can continue the conversation over the break. Martha?
Martha Minow, Harvard Law School. You talk about trust in ways that are very resonant, who has whose back, but it sounds like the solutions are go to the small local communities or rely on the Enlightenment conception of facts. Neither of those are scalable in a particularly great way, except maybe with what the Center for Constructive Communication is working on. Isn't there a deeper problem with trust and distrust, which is believing that whoever is on the other side actually has my interests in heart? And if we have, big tech companies that actually are trying to make money, that's not our interest at heart, et cetera, et cetera. How do we deal with that? That the signifiers of trust are not to be counted on.
No, 100%. And again, if you spend any time with communities and they want to talk about big pharma, we talk about conspiracies, and people are like, you tell me the conspiracy theories are wrong, but let me tell you, Claire, all the ways that my communities have been hurt by, ultimately this is about capitalism. So I think the concern I have when you're absolutely right about how do we change people's minds on things, but fundamentally at the core in a neoliberal society, I can't make those promises to people. So I think that's the challenge that we have. And just quickly to the scale issue, I think I completely hear you, and I speak to funders every single day who go, that's nice, Claire, how's that going to scale? And I actually want to say, there are networks across this country and globally at the community level. This is not about building a new network, it's about harnessing and partnering with those networks. But I think, again, in this room 8 years ago, people were like, media literacy, surely we can just tweak the Facebook algorithm. There was this belief that there was a short, quick algorithmic solution. We've lost 8 to 10 years, right? Because we were looking for that. So to me, it's like, there's no quick answer here, but fundamentally it's got to be at the community level.
I think there's a longer conversation to be had here, but from my neck of the woods, we have a piece of the pie, a component, and it is scalable. So the component is, it's hard to have a trust-based conversation when you can't agree on the basics, right? If we can't agree, I don't know, what the unemployment rate is in the United States, or we can't agree whether Biden said this or did that, it's just very hard to build from that towards a consensus, to have a fact-based conversation if there's, quote, alternative facts. So our contribution, which I think is valuable and scalable, is to provide that actually with respect to media. It doesn't solve the problem, right? There's no magic wand, but it puts us in a sounder footing. And I'm sure there's a lot more behind what you said. I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, Oren and Claire, I know that you're both joining 2 of our workshops as discussants later today, so you'll get the chance to hear more from them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.